Hey, Chris and Dan show fans, if there are any. Are there? Let me know. Yet another book review for you. This is Dan. And I don't know. I've been writing articles for my clinical research newsletter, and I've been reading this little one by Ayn Rand, which is related to the book review I'm going to talk about because it's the same author, Ayn Rand. In this book, The Virtue of Selfishness, which I will do a full review on, but I'm only about halfway through, a little more than halfway through. It basically encapsulates her philosophy in a nonfiction setting, but stories sometimes can paint the picture better. So there's this book that I read multiple times. So the first time I read it was 15 years ago, and then I reread it again recently. Atlas Shrugged. And this book is, I mean, every entrepreneur has probably read it, or at least the majority. I've also read Fountainhead. The only one I have yet to read of hers is Anthem, which I plan to read soon. But it's about business and the philosophy of business and the philosophy of individualism, capitalism, and the role of government. And the most famous question slash phrase in this book is, who is John Galt? And if you read Atlas Shrugged, you're going to find out, but you're also going to know that this question isn't just the opening line. It's a challenge, it's a rallying cry, and the heart of Ayn Rand's philosophy, which is objectivism. Let's break it down because this book definitely does apply to today's society, and really it's been going on this way since the 60s. The 60s was probably the beginning of the decline of like productivity in the US and the golden era. And ever since then, the next generation had it a little worse than the previous one. Now, I'm not going to get into all that in this book review. Chris and I, and sometimes our guest Joey Finrow, get into it. But at its core, this book takes place in a dystopian world where the government over-regulates industries and punishes the innovators who create value. Do you notice that fiction sometimes creates reality? In this case, this is the world we live in. The plot follows the protagonist, Dagny, who's a railroad executive, and Hank Reardon, who's a steel magnate, and they struggle to keep their businesses afloat against the tide of collectivist policies. But the real twist is the strike of the men of the mind led by John Galt, a philosopher engineer who convinces the world's brightest minds to withdraw their talents from a society that exploits them. So what would happen if society lost, like what would happen if the US lost all of our brightest minds and they took their talent somewhere else? Well, hopefully, we won't find out. Maybe this new regime understands this. I believe they do. There are a couple of quotes here. The man who does not value himself cannot value anything or anyone. And another one I liked was, you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. Chris Sabra, I know you're watching. This book's worth reading. Her philosophy, like I said, objectivism. It's not just, you don't have to get it. You don't have to read Atlas Shrugged. I mean, I think you should. I've read it multiple times. You can essentially get most of her thesis from this book, but of course, you get more nuances and more quotes and more philosophy from the stories. Rand champions the idea that the individual's pursuit of their own happiness and success is the highest moral purpose. She argues for rational self-interest, not selfishness in the conventional use of the word, but the kind of focused, principled pursuit of one's goals that drives innovation and progress. On the flip side, Rand harshly criticizes collectivism and altruism, and it's funny how altruism like creeps into our society. I'm not against altruism, together we are better, all this stuff, but when you take altruism to the extreme, it becomes collectivism and it becomes nothing is really yours, everything is ours, and ours ultimately has to be someone who regulates it, which is you get totalitarianism. At least that's the idea. I do believe in this. Um, Collectivism leads to stagnation, and the government, this is Rand speaking her philosophy, The society demand that the capable sacrifice themselves for the incapable. So another couple of quotes I like here are, I swear by my life and my love of it that I will never live for the sake of another man, nor ask another man to live for mine, famously said by John Galt. Another one is, the question isn't who's going to let me, it's who's going to stop me. This is some of the themes from this book, and yes, they are caricatures of her ideas. And John Galt's quote, I understand, sounds awful, but it's showing you the silliness of believing in collectivism. Like there's no real utopia. And living for other people, like you're supposed to want to do that. Like that's a virtue that many people have. I read a lot of other philosophy, Stoicism, and we're all part of the logos, and I believe in all that, but I think when it comes to mandating, society mandating people live for others and not for themselves, you don't get productivity and you don't get progress, really. So I believe there's a role for government, but I think we're at the point where we're way overregulated. I'm writing an article right now, like I said, for clinical research on regulatory capture, which breeds its own kind of corruption. Overregulation basically breeds selfishness, but not of the creators, but of the enforcers. This is me talking now. There's a lot of themes and relevance today: bureaucracy, overregulation, regulatory capture. Rand's overall philosophy is, when you burden the creators, the ones driving progress, you risk the collapse of the entire system. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a site owner like myself in research, or just someone trying to make a difference, Atlas Shrugged pushes you to think about the balance between individualism and control. Another quote I like is, the evil of the world is made possible by nothing but the sanction you give it. And also, money is only a tool. It will take you wherever you wish, but it will not replace you as the driver. My personal takeaways, I think it's a great book. I think everyone should read it at least once. If I had to critique it, it's a little too extreme, but she's trying to drive her point. And also, Ayn Rand came from communist Russia. So like you have to beg her forgiveness, but she did see the beginnings of America starting to look like what that could look like. At least there was an alternate universe where that would have happened, and she was basically urging us not to go down that route. The story is not the best. Like, I love this book, but the story is not the best. She's not like a Mircea Cărtărescu, who's like a great writer of story and interweaves philosophy and all this stuff, which I'm gonna do a book review on his soon as well. But the dialogue of the characters is amazing. The dialogue, and here's the final quote to leave you with, just hopefully it inspires you to read the book. Throughout the centuries, there were men who took first steps down new roads, armed with nothing but their own vision. And Ayn Rand definitely sees this as a virtue and sees these as people that need to be cultivated, not people who need to be shunned or brought to conform to this collectivist ideal, which at the end of the day, collectivism enriches the state, not people. And people, entrepreneurship, capitalism enriches the creators. Along the way, they enrich their employees, they make the lives better for their customers, and there's something called a free market, which I think is super important to consider and not just something to dismiss. So, while the plot and the story not the greatest, I think it's must reading for everyone, especially for the dialogue and for the philosophy. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you read it. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Bye bye.